Good evening and welcome to episode 294 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. It's a Thursday edition of the Private Property Podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to it. You're tuned into the only daily property show in South Africa that helps you on your property journey. And to all our regular viewers, welcome back. You know how we do it every single weekday. You and I have an appointment at 7 p.m. where we're always unpacking a hot property topic that helps us make better property decisions. Doesn't matter whether you're looking to buy, to sell, to build, or even if you're renting. This certainly does cover the different areas of our property needs as consumers, as tenants, as well as landlords. And talking about catering to our different property needs, you can also look forward to different property shows across Private Property's social media pages. As it is a Thursday, you can catch award-winning farmer Umbali Nwoko on the Farming Podcast, and that's coming to your screens at 8 p.m. And you can also catch the Farming Podcast every Tuesdays at the same time, where Umbali is always in conversation with people within the agricultural landscape who help us make better agricultural decisions. And every Mondays and Fridays, Chad takes us through the Home Shoppers Show, where he's always profiling great properties that you can find on www.privateproperty.co.za. And if you want a great sneak peek of how some of those properties are, then do make sure that you are tuned in to the Home Shoppers Show. And every Wednesday, Esty Claassen takes us through the First Time Home Buyers Show, where she's always in conversation with people who've not only walked that first time home buying journey, but have gone on to grow their property portfolios from strength to strength. And those are some of the great programs that you can look forward to across Private Property's social media pages every single weekday at 8 p.m. Of course, you follow us across our social media pages on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, as well as on YouTube, and we're now also on TikTok. You can also follow myself at Zamantungwa_K on Twitter, as well as on Instagram, tackling all things relating to property. Now, talking about all things relating to property, one of the things that are also relating to property is one that we always touch on, at least on a quarterly basis, because it is one of those spaces that not a lot of people, sort of directly invest in, unless, of course, you're sort of investing in REITs, but certainly does affect us, as many of us are, of course, work in that particular space. And we'll find out shortly what I mean by that. We're looking at the future of office trends. It's been over a year of many of us probably working from home, particularly if the nature of your work allowed you to work from home. And various business operations have also had to look and relook how they're going to have their operations and whether they still need, the same office space that they previously needed, and how they can go about cutting down costs as much as possible. But also on the other side, you've found very big property players also looking at the opportunities that the empty office space has provided. And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at this evening. I want to find out from you at home, are you currently back at the office? Wherever you're working, have they said you need to now come back to the office, or you need to prepare yourself for coming back to the office? Or are you on full-on work from home mode, and even the business or the company has said, listen, we don't intend on even asking you to come back, whether it's before the end of the year or even in the new year. How is your work situation right now? And which one do you prefer? I know some people are saying, work from home was great, but now it's not that great, especially for my waist. The kitchen being that close and all your munchies being that close is one of those things that unfortunately means that many of us struggle to stay on our diets. And other people saying, look, I'm more productive. The fact that I don't have to, do any of the office small chat and keeping up with who's got a baby and who's doing what means that I'm able to focus on my work more. So which of the two do you prefer, from working at home or, of course, working in the office? To help us better understand what the future of office trends look like, I'm joined by John Jack, who's the CEO at Galeti. John, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really good, John. It's always such a pleasure to have you on the show, and it's always just such a pleasure to talk property with you, because you I think, if anything, conversations with you are always great for the nerd in me, because there are parts where I'm just a nerd about them. So it's always yeah, so it's always great to have just that part kind of stimulated a bit. But this, our conversation this evening, I want us, before we even look at some of what we've seen, perhaps let's look at pre-COVID, where offices were, because there's a part of, and I ask this just in the South African context, and because there's a part of me that thinks a lot of these South African commercial players who also have office space in their portfolio should have in some way or another planned for where we're currently seeing ourselves, particularly because in other markets we're already seeing that kind of the kind of trends that we're certainly picking up to now in South Africa. So pre-COVID, what was the stage of our the office space in South Africa?
Pre-COVID, the stage of office space in South Africa was, it was actually not performing that well. So you'd already had an increase in vacancy. You'd already had a bit of a tough environment to try and achieve solid rental renewals. And what I mean by that is, at the end of any lease, it comes to the renewal period, and the landlord renews the lease. They want to renew it as close to the exit rental or that final year's rental as possible. And what was happening already is you were starting to see quite significant reversion. So people will renew their lease, not even flat, 10%, 15% down. And in certain cases, on much longer leases, bigger than that. So you can imagine the negative effect that already starts to have on the market. But at least there was demand and occupancy and all the rest of it. And what's going to happen? What's happened is that, now everyone's working from home, and everyone, as much as possible, is trying to reduce their office space. And that's created a knock-on effect. And some of the biggest challenges were the sublets. And where you've got landlords competing against landlords, and that's all's good and well, all of a sudden you've got your tenants competing against you to get new tenants at the same time. And for them, it's a totally different effect, because they're looking to reduce their expenditure and you're looking to increase your income. And these are different games. And what was happening is the sublets were winning. And the landlords were then forced to try and match these very aggressive terms offered by the sublessors. But that said, is coming up to when we went back into the harder lockdown now, those sublessors were starting to remove their stock from the market. They were saying, we're no longer interested in leasing out our space. We're just going to hold on to it. And that was quite positive for landlords, and sort of took that challenge out of the market.
And when I then look at some of the trends, I was saying earlier that one of the things that I picked up, one of the markets that fascinates me a lot is the Asian market, and I tend to look at them not just within the property space, but also just in different areas and other industries as well. Certainly observing some of the trends that they have, and I know one of the big things, for example, was they were already creating the live at home, the live work scenario that we're now seeing a lot of players kind of moving towards, whether it is even some of the players that we've had here, like your Black Bricks, where you want to have a really integrated way that people can live and also work, and you're able to also provide that sort of in either one building. If you're able to even do a lifestyle complex in that nature, perhaps even integrated into that. And so that's why I have jokingly say, in many ways, as South Africa, we should have seen that we're going to somewhat get there, because I tend to find that the East tends to be first in many things that we, slowly end up catching up on. When we then look at the trends that where we currently are now, especially at the backdrop of how we're seeing the East and some of the trends that we've picked up in the East, what have been some of the trends, firstly, that you've just picked up that are directly in response to how COVID has impacted South Africa? How have the different landlords and the different commercial players sort of adapted to the lack of demand, certainly for office space, and with obviously many of us even working from home?
And just one thing you forgot there is live, work, play. So you've also got to play there. You can't just, you must
live and work. Yes.
We are entitled to some fun, but they've come up with a brilliant concept. And I like Black Brick as an example. Another one is Athol Yards in Dennis Road. And I love those examples because it really is that there's the place where you live. So that's literally your unit. There's the place where you work, and there they've got like a co-working type of environment. And there's a place that you play, and that they've got a restaurant, and they've got a lounge, and they've got a TV room, and they've got a bit of a cinema, and so it does have all of these aspects. And so I like that example of what's actually happened. But that said, Johannesburg's late into the game. Cape Town is way ahead when it comes to this. These developments in Cape Town are all over the place. You're down into Salt River in the lower part of town. You got some beautiful developments there. The Harry, for example, being developed by Jeff Clue. It's just a great environment to be in. It's really cool. And Cape Town's got the idea of the small coffee shop and the little bar and all that kind of thing. And these guys are getting absolutely devastated. These smaller businesses are getting devastated by the further and further lockdowns. And so, we really have to, I was listening to a podcast I told you earlier by Ryan Noach, where he was saying that they believe, according to Discovery's actuaries, who I can believe, are going to get the above 18-year-olds vaccinated by December this year. They have enough vaccination. They're rolling out vaccination sites. You see the partnership between the Western Cape government and Discovery at the Cape Town Convention Centre, where they're going to be rolling out a significant number of vaccines. And so you can believe that is actually right. So, people have to roll through this fourth or the third cycle now and hopefully not a fourth by the end of the year. And then we start getting to the place where we can go back to some form of normality. And there you start to see the longer term. So all these short-term effects that people are noticing now are ultimately going to play out, where you'd see people back to the restaurants, and it was really people starting to deploy cash into entertaining themselves and getting out of the house and all the rest of it. And so comes a third wave, and you've got quiet parking lots and that kind of thing again, where you're just starting to get positive, it slows down again. But what we have actually seen, and this is more from a corporate perspective, corporates have got into a position where over this lockdown period, they've actually been able to go and clean out their operations. So really improve their operations, cut out any unnecessary expenses, and get themselves into the position that where they do actually start trading properly again, they'll have significant operating leverage into the future, which means all this cash that they've been piling up, they'll actually start to deploy into their businesses or growth of businesses, new products, services, etc. And that's where you're going to need people to remember that they're part of a culture and part of a business and that kind of thing. So what I'm in a long way getting around to is that the office is going to be a different environment. It'll be somewhere for everyone to collaborate and be and meet everyone. And, you were saying earlier that people, like to get in there and hear the latest gossip and all the rest of it. And some people don't. No one doesn't like to hear the latest gossip. So they're all going to be there at least some part of the week to catch up on what's going on. And that's just part of a culture. I was listening to another podcast on the TPN network last night by the COO of Growth Point, Engelbert Binedell. And, he quite cleverly put it that there was a huge increase in productivity. Big, like when everyone got home, you could have Zoom call after Zoom call, and it was very productive, although you were a bit nervous about what was going on, but it was highly productive. And now people have got a little bit sort of, I'm just going to go to gym, and I'm just going to do this. And it's got a little bit more floaty. And so everyone just needs to pull back to the mothership, decide on what their on what their growth strategy is and go out there and execute. And so it's going to have a place, but we've got an oversupply, and that is for sure.
And on that oversupply, then John, how do we deal with that oversupply? Because as you were saying earlier in our conversation, we already had an oversupply pre-COVID, right? If anything, COVID just exacerbated what was already glaring to so many of us. We already saw high vacancies in the office space pre-COVID. I mean, if I look at, for example, the Sandton area, you saw businesses moving into bigger, fancier offices, and their previous offices, laying dormant, and you would see very massive to-let signs, in Sandton, where we wouldn't think we would see that many. And so now it also becomes a question of what are we going to be doing with all that vacant space, especially given that in as much as the economy slowly opens up, as the restrictions, ease up and more of us are able to get vaccinated, in as much as, commercial activity may go to almost, we'll say, back to normal. The normal pre-COVID was already an oversupply. How do we then go about dealing with that issue?
Yeah, you got such a strange situation because you've got online shopping, which is leading to a huge boost in the logistics sector, which means that less people are actually going to the physical shops. Then you've got this huge reduction in demand as a result of people making a 60% work from home policy, which means that you're literally just there 60% of the time. And as a result of the flexibility of that means that not everyone is there at any point in time. Therefore, you need less office. And on top of that, you've got people who are now living outside of the city. So you've got these Zoom towns, which are largely the coastal towns, where there's been radical property. Yeah. I mean, we were down in December, and they were telling us how many had registered in the previous months. It's unbelievable. I mean, really, I was chatting to some guys who I know that live in St. Francis, and the guys are basically saying that all of a sudden St. Francis is a lively town. And so what do we do with the balance of the space? How do we turn it around? Well, the guys have come in with the idea of let's create micro apartments, but already in Sandton, the supply of those, you look at Athol Yards, you look at Black Brick 1, Black Brick 2, and there are a couple of others coming online. Already they're starting to fight for tenants because there's only so much demand on that basis.
And there are only so many people who want that kind of living, right? Because I think when we look at the work play, the work live play model, not everybody is looking to live in those kinds of certainly buildings or establishments. Some people want a normal complex, right? They don't want a building where we're going to be using the same office space. They're just not trying to do that. I don't know if I'm a millennial, if as millennials, we're going to want to grow into that as well. I mean, for the most part, it works out when we're still younger. You don't have children, but the moment they're kids, would that necessarily be still the way of life that you want to choose? So you're correct that there's definitely going to be, and we're already seeing it now. There certainly is, competition for that kind of profile of somebody who's looking for that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I think I've missed the boat on that one. I'm probably not the right target market, maybe a slightly younger target market. And you read articles about the millennials, but I think, millennials are starting to be quite a broad category. Maybe the younger millennials, they're going to spend money on buying a property. They hate the idea of having bought the property. They'd rather be investing in GameStop or something along these lines, or some kind of crypto or whatever it is. I mean, those guys know all about it, and I sometimes, even though I'm sort of on the cusp of it, I feel a bit old with the way that they think about the world. And I think that market will grow. So there will be an increased demand over time, but it's going to be an organic growth. It's not going to be this is a new way to live and we're all going to do that. And you know what? I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to get in there. I think that's a little bit far-fetched. But what I do see is that it's very much catering for that younger market, or some of them are positioning for the Huawei, for example, where they've got a lot of foreign nationals working here, and they just want to have some good accommodation for them close to work, and so they would take out 40 leases, for example, and so the guys can come in and go out, and so that they don't land themselves up with a whole lot of long-term leases far away from the office. This is a little bit more of an environment, So I think those are, people are really scratching for different ideas. The other day I was at the old IBM premises, which is directly opposite Sandton City. It's such a prime site in Sandton, and it's an older office. It's a B-grade office. But the purpose is it was held for development. So the Caballeros Group own it. They held it for development. They had a massive 70,000 square meter building plan there for one of the banks that was in the market at that point in time. And, that deal didn't go ahead. So they still hold it for development, and they turned the idea around. Do we create a car dealership and some resi? No, we don't like resi. Okay, car dealership and maybe some commercial. What kind of commercial? What are people looking for, And so it's all about creating that type of environment. Security is huge. That's, it's just so prime at the moment. You really have to be well secured. Walking around the Mark the other day, which is a Momentum-owned building, high security, something like 400 cameras, or like a massive number of cameras and security and that kind of thing. That's quite an encouraging environment to be in. You want to be there because you certainly don't want to be in an environment that you can somehow fall prey to some kind of crime, or that's definitely not what you want. You want the live work place. You want to be able to go down to the food lovers market or the Woolworths or whatever it is. You want to be able to be in reasonable distance to home. So maybe you don't want to live upstairs, but you want to live reasonably close. Let's say Morningside distance from Sandton, for example. And maybe Morningside, you've just got an apartment and you actually live further out. You live in Delstrom, or you live in, somewhere further away where you have a bigger property and more lifestyle. People are looking for lifestyle. They've reconnected with their families. They've reconnected with,
nature. We've reconnected with it. I want to farm. I'm looking for a small little farm away from the city, not too far, so I can always just drive in for any work engagements, but feel far enough. And I think for me, that's kind of the next move. So nothing too massive, because again, it's a security concern. So nothing too secluded, just close enough for all activity, but far enough to feel like I'm not quite in Joburg. And I'm a city girl, right? So there certainly is that sense of wanting to be out there a little bit, growing my own fruits and vegetables. Maybe even having a chicken or a goat, just for control. But there's certainly that desire. And I'm fairly young. I think not a lot of people in my age group would typically want that kind of lifestyle. And when we do want it at a smaller scale, we'd be like, at the very least, can I have a ground floor unit where I can at least have my own little garden? I lived for the past 4 years, on the third floor. I didn't have a balcony. I think lockdown made me see that I don't want that for myself. I wanted a garden. I wanted to be able to go out in the sun and grow something. So I think when we look at some of those, it's going to be interesting how when we are, and when I say we millennials are slightly older, so when we're kind of in our 50s, I know the oldest millennial is approaching 40 now, but when we're essentially in our 50s, what are going to be some of the trends for Gen Z, and what are going to be some of their needs? Are they going to be as attached to wanting physical property as many of us in our sort of generation still fundamentally are? We are taking your questions and comments at home this evening as we look at the future of office trends. I wanted to find out from you whether you are currently working from home or you're back at the office, and which of the two do you prefer? We had one of our top fan gang members, Matashingane, saying home, please, so convenient and cost effective. And we've got Ugoso Khumelo on Facebook also saying, I'm currently working while traveling a lot around KZN. And I think one of the things that, and you pointed to this, John, one of the great things that we've seen, one of the trends that we've seen are these Zoom towns, right? A part of me wants to try it out maybe for September or October. Certainly when Gautengers, when you can leave the province, want to probably do 2 weeks in a coastal town and just live there, because we now know that we don't have to physically be in certain spaces. Now, John, I want your take on where you then think the future of the office space is going, particularly from developers themselves, or landlords who have quite a sizable chunk of office space in their portfolio. Where do you see it going, and how do you see them kind of trying to rethink the different ways they can use or reuse the real estate that they already have, so that they're still able to get tenants and obviously get an income, even if it means slightly tweaking the nature of the building that they have, or adding a resi component to it if it's big enough and it allows?
Some of the innovative things we've seen, for example, the Text and Property Fund has come up with an idea. They call it Tech Space, I believe. They're launching it now, which is in a sort of normal office environment, a floor. They've taken a floor and they've chopped it up and made smaller offices, much smaller offices, that you have. It has a much higher sort of ratio of meeting rooms and hangout rooms, and they almost fit the whole thing out for you, so you can literally just plug and play. You've got a totally flexible lease, and it's like, maybe it's like a WeWork, for example, but bigger. So it's, you are self-contained in your own smaller office, but it's largely made. It's like a series of meeting rooms and lounges and project tables and that kind of thing. So they're trying out a very different approach there. Other guys are, and we keep saying to our clients, what you need to be doing is creating more of an experience, and that means that you're, instead of like reducing your rental all the way to the floor and it's a race to the bottom, what you need to do is create an experience out of your building, because like employers, you as the building owner need to attract people to your building. Employers also need to attract people back to work, because it's not ideal just having everyone out there. Yes, you do get in one sense, there's an element of reducing your cost, but on the other side, there's an element of increasing your productivity and revenue. So you've got to balance these two out. I know that everyone, whenever there's some kind of crisis, they rush to their marketing, for example, they just cancel their marketing. And that's okay for a while, but after a while, you start to become you just fade from people's memories, and slowly your revenue drops, and slowly no one remembers you anymore. So you have to continue going, and maybe you don't continue at the same stretch, but you certainly continue going. You got to keep going forward and keep motivating, keep your people there and bring them in. So it's about creating some kind of excitement in the office. And I don't think anyone's got it right yet, and I don't think anyone's found the solution, but I love the innovation that's coming out of guys like Texton, for example, who are coming up with ideas to say, we're going to try this out, and if it doesn't work, well, we haven't done it to our entire office portfolio, but we've taken some really nice buildings and we're offering a new service, and it's going to be great, So that's a good example of what makes things, just a bit more of an experience. You don't walk into an empty lobby, which is just, there's no one there, and it just feels a little bit sort of isolated. Make something happen there. What can happen? Like, get a coffee barista in and have subsidized coffees, and put some music in there, and put some interesting plants in there, and just have something that makes you go, oh, this is such a cool place to be. I love that little ritual in the morning of, I walk in and I have a really nice coffee and I go and sit out on this deck, and it's got lots of plants, and it's got a green wall, and it's got, that's an experience, something that you'll remember, And another thing that Engelbert pointed out, which I thought was quite well observed, is that not everyone in South Africa has the greatest home environment where they just have a study to go and work from, or whatever it is. Sometimes you're actually in your bedroom and working from your bedroom, and you're like, well, this is not great, and you don't have anyone to talk to, and there's only so much TV you can watch before you start watching repeated programs, and there are no more series to watch, and it just gets a little bit boring, and people are looking for something to make them feel good, that first coffee in the morning, or that, the view from the balcony in the afternoon, or whatever it might be. That's the kind of stuff that gets people going and inspires.
As you're saying that, you actually made me think of, I think it may have been Google, where when, in the States, when they're slowly opening up, a lot of the employees didn't want to come back to the campus. So here they've gone and built, we know they've got an incredible campus, state of the art. And a lot of these tech giants build it in such a way that you pretty much spend your whole life, on the campus. And for them, that's just part of how they, fundamentally operate. And yet they now saw a lot of their employees not wanting to come back to this fancy campus that has all these amazing things that many of us, back home would be like, I would love if, where I worked, if we had some of those amenities and those resources. So it's also interesting to see how different people and certainly different markets and different industries, because I think something like that is very unique to the tech giants, because that's just how they kind of build their operations, and they have a fundamentally different culture that goes with that.
Well, there's a big tip-off there, actually, because what we're seeing is that the smaller guys, businesses like ours, under 200 people, it's not too many people, but it's not 1,000 people. It's not 2,000 people. That is a lot of people. And that just, every time you go up, every time you double, so 5, 10, 20, on and on and on, it fundamentally changes the environment. So where you've got thousands of people, certainly you don't want to hang out there. And you're seeing this in restaurants as well. So those restaurants, which are only inside restaurants, i.e. they've got no balcony space, nowhere to be outside, everyone today will pick outside, even if it's in the middle of winter. People are going to sit outside because there's some fresh air there. Not everyone's breathing on top of each other. Going inside just goes against, obviously, your thinking, despite our air traffic, that always boggles the mind, where people stand in a queue 2 meters apart and then they sit within 5 centimeters of each other. But nonetheless, it's the same kind of thing. People don't want to go into crowded restaurants, and people don't want to go into crowded offices. So instead of making your office look like a crime scene where you're putting like big X's on desks and putting chairs on top of the desk, and it's actually just a horrible environment to be in, just take the spare desk out and put it somewhere, just move the desks apart, create different environments where there's smaller teams working. And that's what I'm talking about. The office is going to be a different experience. Move people apart slightly, get some fresh air in there, make sure you're not sitting on top of each other.
You are away with those, and I think the unfortunate thing is we were seeing a lot of these small little cubicles. People don't want that. We hate it. I hated, office was this open plan. I hated that, and oftentimes would even go find studies that were like, listen, this is actually not conducive for productivity, because that's just how much I fundamentally didn't like it. Before we wrap, John, and I'll let you go, any final views on where you see office trends going, particularly for South Africa, let's say certainly in the next year, because we know we're still, in as much as by the end of this year, we're predicting that the majority of adults in South Africa are going to be vaccinated. That may or may not happen. We know how that area of things, unfortunately, tends to have its own turbulence. Where do you see the future of our office space within the next year?
I think 2 things. One, landlords are going to be providing more plug and play type of options where you can just move in and it's a really cool environment, as opposed to you having to spend sort of this massive capex in fitting your office out, and we're talking like 12 months rental up front. Landlords are probably going to be providing a bit more of a plug and play. The other thing is the big guys, the banks. You see Nedbank saying that they're going to be doing a far broader work from home policy. It's going to be the same with with a lot of the bigger banks, actually. And so those guys are going to go to a completely more flexible policy. And that's just going to normalize at some stage. And then what we need is GDP growth, specifically in the business and services sector, to increase to take up that vacant office space. But there's going to be a massive oversupply. There's going to be a hangover from this, and rentals are coming down, but they will stabilize at some point. But a lot of offices are going to be mothballed, and it's not, that's happened before. It's happened all over the world before, where offices are just mothballed, and that's just an unfortunate for any landlord who lands up with that mothballed office. So it's going to be different.
And it certainly is going to be different. Certainly one of those issues that we're also going to keep a very close eye on. John, thank you so much for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to speak to you.
All the best.
And that is John Jack, who's the COO at Galetti. And that brings us to the end of this evening's edition of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. I'll be back on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., but it is a Thursday, so you can catch award-winning farmer Umbali Nwoko on the Farming Podcast at 8 p.m. Till then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.